Good afternoon, Lichen folks. This is your first in a series of lectures on Lichen morphogroups. These lectures will be helpful for studying the site recognition list for lichens for this quarter. I will cover all of the lichens on your site recognition list during these talks, and they're all going to be divided up into these categories of morphogroups. The first, which is the flames. So what are some general features of the flame lichens? These are lichens with bright yellow or orange thalli, regardless of their growth form. So these lichens can be crustose, foliose, or fruticose. Many of these lichens are nitrophytes. That means that they don't mind living in nutrient-rich environments. They have a high tolerance for nitrogen input. These could be lichens that live in agricultural areas or urban areas, or that even potentially lichens that grow where birds roost. They produce bright yellow and orange cortical pigments that serve as protection against UV light. So these lichens are well adapted for high light conditions. Cortical pigments is just another way of saying these are secondary metabolites that are embedded in the cortex of the lichen above the algal layer. And these are all chlorolichens, or lichens that have green algae photobionts. Let's start with Letharia valpina. Now, this isn't necessarily a nutrient-rich indicator species, but it is a flame lichen. It has a fruticose thallus that's tufted and richly branched. How you're going to distinguish this one is it's literally a bright neon yellow green. Some would describe the color as chartreuse, and it actually makes an excellent dye on natural fibers like silk and wool. This is a great picture of its habitat. So growing on the trunk of a pine tree on the east side of the Cascades would be a typical place that I would see it growing. It also likes to grow on decorticated branches and snags. Letharia valpina is covered with ceridia and or isidia, and it gives it this kind of powdery texture that you see in this picture. There's also Letharia columbiana, which has apothecia and no isidia and ceridia. So these are alternate strategies for reproduction. The next lichen is Vulpisita canadensis. This is a foliose lichen. Its upper and lower surface are bright to deep yellow. The medulla is yellow as well. So if you were to open up the inside of this lichen, it would be yellow all the way through. It's lacking in ceridia and isidia, but apothecia are usually present and look like these brown, kind of irregular shaped circles along the thallus. You'll find it on bark and wood. Pinus and larix are good representative genera that you might find it on. And it's also common on twigs in floodplains, valley bottoms, and riparian habitats. This picture makes it look really large, but the thalli, I would say, are usually about the size of a quarter or smaller. The next lichen I want to turn your attention to from the flames morphogroup is Candelaria pacifica. The thallus is actually minutely foliose, so tiny foliose, even though it almost looks like a crust when you see it growing on the side of a tree or on a branch. It has ceridia that grow marginally or terminally. So margin means along the margins, as you see here, and terminally just means at the tip of the lobes. It has a yolk yellow, lemon yellow to a yellow greenish tinge to it. It likes to grow on nutrient-rich bark or wood. So again, this is the nitrophyte characteristic I was describing. And you'll find it in valley and foothills, suburban, urban, and agricultural areas. One way to recognize this is to potential lookalikes is that all of its spot tests are negative, and we'll be getting into chemical testing next week. Okay, next up we have Rozovskia elegans. So that's a mouthful, isn't it? The synonym is Zanthuria elegans. So that's how I learned the lichen, and some lichenologists will still refer to it as Zanthuria elegans. And I think that's the way it's referred to in your second edition macrolichens book. The name has since been updated. Either one is fine for you to know and remember. I would like you to know that Skia is the most current accepted name. And if you're ever wondering about how to find that out, you can always visit Esslinger's Lichens of the North American Lichen checklist online, and that will give you the most up-to-date accepted name. So this thallus is foliose. So again, it almost appears as though it's a crust, but if you go up close, you can see that it has, it's actually just very small foliose lobes there. The upper surface is orange and the lower surface is white or pale yellow. It's widespread in the Pacific Northwest. It's on rock and exposed to sheltered sites. It's often found in nutrient-rich roosting spots of birds or small mammals, and it has a K+ purple or red reaction. So that's Zanthuria elegans. Again, look for that on rock in nutrient-rich roosting spots. Next, we have Polycarpa. Again, this is one that's had a recent name change, old name, Zanthuria polycarpa. It's found on bark and wood and has many similarities to the Zanthoria elegans that we just viewed on the last page, except this one prefers to grow on bark and wood. So you can kind of narrow it down by looking for the orange to yellow top, the white to yellow bottom, minute foliose, and then whether it's on rock or whether it's on bark. Okay, so that's all the flames on your site ID list, but there's a couple others that you can look for that are not on your site ID list. And I mention them because you're likely to encounter them in the Pacific Northwest, and they could be confused with some of the ones on your site ID list. So first we have xanthomendoza oregana. So this one is, again, very small, and it forms yellow to yellowish greenish, imbricate to loosely oppressed rosettes. It has marginal cerealia. So along the margins, you see these areas where the ceridia emerge from, with flat to undulate lobes. You can see the lobes kind of stick out from the substrate versus being more pressed. It likes to grow on bark and wood. It's widespread and common in coastal Pacific Northwest throughout the Willamette Puget Trough, in low elevation woodlands, urban, and agricultural areas. And its cortex is K+ purple to red. Xanthomendoza oregana. Finally, we have Xanthoria perrientina. This is possibly an invasive species. You can find it growing along the I-5 corridor from California up to British Columbia. It's the broadest lobe of the epiphytic Zanthoria in our region. You can find it on bark and wood in hardwood low elevation forests, riparian and agricultural and populated areas. And this image on the right is actually taken by one of your classmates, Lauren Ray. And you can see it's kind of like pretty large and charismatic looking compared to the other ones. And it can sometimes take this greenish hue on. And I've seen it growing actually at the Scatter Creek rest area on the north side of the I-5 corridor, but they think that it's been spreading along the I-5 corridor through cars, like spores on people's tires and stuff. So it's interesting. And there is an iNaturalist project that's all about invasive lichens called Alien Lichens of the Pacific Northwest or something like that. So you can look for that project and add any observations that you make of this lichen. Okay, well, that's it for the flames. We will next cover the fruticose scrubs. Thank you so much.